January 10, 2022, first meeting of the year, meeting of the Bluff Village Board of Trustees for our Committee of the Whole meeting. Clerk, please call the roll.
Is she here? She's not here. I'll call roll. Trustee Inkerman?
Here.
Trustee Briand?
Here.
Trustee Fisher?
Here.
Trustee Marquis?
Here.
Trustee Rappin?
Here.
Trustee Ryder?
Here.
Thank you. Our first item is our non-agenda items and visitors for public comment. The Committee of the Whole allocates 15 minutes during this item for those individuals who would like the opportunity to address the Committee of the Whole on any matter not listed on the agenda. Each person addressing the Committee of the Whole is asked to limit their comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. Obviously, we have nobody in this room today. Do we have anybody online who would like to make a comment?
No, sir.
Thank you. Proceeding on to item number 4, general business. The Committee of the Whole will entertain requests from anyone present to modify the order of a business to be conducted. And again, nobody is in this room. Any hands raised?
No.
Thank you. Well, proceeding on to the consideration for the minutes from the December 13, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. And the second was from?
Barbara Engelman.
Thank you very much, Barb. Any questions? I believe this is a roll call. We are remote. Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Inkerman?
Aye.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Marquis?
Aye.
Trustee Rappin? Trustee Rappin? Trustee Rappin, you're still muted. Thank you so much. And Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Our next item is a discussion regarding the architectural salvage from the Stonebridge Manor. Should I read the first page of the memorandum?
I don't think so.
Okay. It might be,
I'm happy to summarize.
could you please?
Sure. So in the packet is a memorandum regarding, really starts off sharing the actual passage of the settlement agreement describing the village's agreed terms with respect to capturing architectural artifacts. That language should be familiar to all of you. The village has started, actually, we have a proposal that's also in the packet from a local contractor who gives a la carte menu, if you will, to going out and capturing those goods, creating them and get them to our destination of choice. And the goal of tonight's meeting was to get direction from you all so as to finalize this list and then go about actually securing the items. In the memorandum is a specific list of 4 items that the Lake Bluff History Museum representatives communicated to me what they were trying, what they wanted to get for their own collection, which included the stained glass windows, which I know the board has been concerned with from the beginning. On the rear elevation or west elevation, there's some deer skull heads with copper awnings that they would like to have retrieved, as well as on the east elevation, you go through the front door, that glazed area, and then there's the main door with that has a dark granite surround and a large wooden door. They wanted that item as well as the dining room marble fireplace surround. And I think they approached this with the idea that they wanted, I guess, to have a number of goods from the manor to capture that piece of Lake Bluff history, at the same time, not necessarily go out with and try to capture everything within the manor. I shared this same list, this overall list from Jim Leduc with Peter Kite. I have not heard back from him yet. I was hoping I'd be able to tell you all that maybe he would have other salvage crews go through after the village goes through. I can't say for certain if that's going to happen at all. But again, the village has the storage container at Lake Bluff ready to accept goods and fulfill this element of the settlement agreement with the direction from you all.
I have a question.
Yes.
So what is, if we were to say, okay, please salvage the list of, I think, 18 items or 17 items, 21 items, what would be the price of removal by Leduc and Associates?
Some of most of it is what you see plus 20%, but there are a number of items toward the back of the, and I guess actually intertwined in here also that are more kind of, for example, the wood paneling is kind of a time and material and allowance.
Okay.
Because it may be really easy to peel some of that off. On the other hand, they're not certain if it's going to come off in small pieces, and at that point they would say, don't waste your time, it's not worth the labor. So it's hard to say for certain. We didn't go through that entire calculation just because knowing that this, you guys may only want to talk about 4 items or 3 items or, whatever the number is. So the calculation was not done, but it does include that they're looking for profit, obviously, to do this work. Also, there's some fees at the back end talking about crating items and then delivery. So again, it's going to vary at the end of the day. This also assumes, certain things to be true, like how many items are collected, and so some of this is going to get trimmed down. So it's hard to say for certain.
Are we gifting the items to the museum? Or will they help pay a little bit for the removal?
They did not indicate that has not been discussed, is the short answer.
Okay.
If I count all the items, not counting the 20% from Jim Leduc, this is about $44,000, very quick math. So is there a thought about getting easy item first for a price and getting the harder items such as the paneling on the wall? Has that thought being done also?
Well, I think there's, I guess one thing to think about is within the settlement agreement, it talks about, there's a list of very specific items that have been, I'll call pre-approved by the Stonebridge, with one being exterior ornaments like the deer heads and so forth that were talked about. The front and interior doors, again, that's something that's been identified by the museum that they would like. Light fixtures, nobody has said or indicated that I'm aware of any desire to capture some of those. When we went through the house, a lot of those, it was difficult to determine, but most of them did not seem to be original. If they were, they had already disappeared. Mm-hmm. The stained glass windows, already mentioned that, and the fireplaces. So that's something that's been talked about, is desired. But for some other things, like the paneling, that had not been agreed to in advance. We would need to go back and work that out with the Stonebridge group to see if they would be open to that additional items that were not actually included on this list.
Well, I was only trying to make a point to easy item to salvage to difficult items to salvage. I just said paneling for a difficult item to, for example, to salvage. Has there been the point I'm trying to make is, do we have a two-tier type of thinking from a cost standpoint?
No, I mean, again, it's just a la carte because one, not knowing what ultimately the village would want. The idea is that I had some conversations with board members earlier today. I think there are some ideas by certain members that may have, a longer list of goods that they would like to secure than what the museum's actually asking for. So I think maybe the way to do this is pursue it is there, you can go through the items and say, is this something we want to save? If not, then not.
So maybe put a Google spreadsheet online with basically a tally by, a checklist by trustees to say what would be preferable to them, and we could end up with
I mean, we can do that now as well as,
Okay.
it's something just to say, yeah, I don't know that it's how aggressive you all want to be in capturing these goods, so.
Correct. What is your opinion, Barbara?
Well, it seems like there could be a quite exhaustive list of items that a number of people would find valuable. And I think we need to look at that larger group of items. And then there's a smaller subset, which the History Museum has said that they would be interested in. And I guess as a board, I would think that to get a larger view of it, maybe we need to look at how much exposure we want in terms of expending funds and efforts to get these items. What is our comfort level? And how, do we want to be in the business of determining the final resting place for all of these items? And so it's an easy ask about the items that we have an interested party, which is the History Museum. And the conversation does need to be had about, we're going to put thousands of dollars out to obtain these items. Is that something that the village will ultimately bear the cost for, or we might ask for donations so that it can be part of the museum? We can talk about that. So before we get too granular, do we want to just say that the list that's out there is the comfort level that we have for putting that money up front to get the item, house it, inventory it, and then figure out at a later point in time what the destination is? Because we can get really detailed really fast. So do we need to just look at the big list and say the approximate level of expense is X, and are we comfortable with that? Because I don't know that we want to spend a bunch of time, going through ticky, ticky, tick. Somebody will, and somebody will do that eventually, but I don't know that that's what we need to do tonight. We need to figure out what exposure we want, what effort we want, what dollars we want to put in this.
So the thought is, looking at that list, the thought will be, my quick calculation was about $45,000, counting 20% for the project management behind or the removal is about, let's say, 60,000 total at the end of the day. This is our our total exposure, not counting the ship, the container, and anything else that would happen to the village for storage. So let's say our total exposure is $60,000. This is the maximum liability we have. And the minimum liability would be what the History Museum would like to get. So we can just say today we budget 60. We have a spreadsheet, and whatever the History Museum doesn't want, we can resell it to our community, and we might end up making money or breaking even. That's at the very minimum, and be done with it. Or we could say, we could have a maximum budget of something in between $60,000 and what the History Museum wants, and we can work with that as well.
Regis.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, the History Museum is only one interested party. I don't know if anyone has reached out to the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation, since Howard Van Doren Shaw obviously was also an architect of interest in Lake Forest. So while they're primarily concerned with Lake Forest, they may have some interest in some of these pieces. And some pieces have more value than others. I agree with Barbara. On the one hand, we could just go to town with this building, but Drew and I talked at length this morning. I think some of this also has to do with the ease with which some of these items can be removed.
Yes.
So there's some freezes. I sent a bunch of pictures to Drew. There's some freezes that are really important, but they may not be able to be saved because they'll be damaged at the time they're trying to be taken out, versus, for example, the mantle pieces, especially the one on the second floor, which has the signature Shaw basket, which I've talked about before. So I want to make sure we've exhausted all the possible participants as well, because there may be other people, other organizations that might have some interest and may be interested in helping us with this financially too, so that we're not bearing the brunt of this by ourselves.
I would like to add to this conversation that is an important point of conversation, that is what is the role of a village regarding salvaging a historical item. So it's a financial exposure as opposed to it is history of a village, and was our, as you say, Kate, was our important items to salvage from an historical standpoint and community standpoint. And so I would
Yes.
like to hear the board about that very specific part. It is, we are playing with basically village finances for a thing that might not be important to the community, or it might be very important to the community. And so I would like to hear you guys about that.
Well, I think saving artifacts from this home are important. I think a lot of people in the community like the home and are disappointed that it might be coming down. So I think we have a responsibility to save portions of it for the historical context. And how much of it that we save, I think we're just going to have to determine based on the cost, clearly. And then also what kind of, if they're damaged or not, basically. I think a lot of the items we're looking at, especially on the outside of the house, are damaged. So I kind of started, when I was looking at the criteria, I was looking at whether or not things had been damaged or vandalized, and kind of adding that into the mix of variables of what to save. I guess I would be interested in knowing, I mean, the crown molding in the library is beautiful and so intricate. I would love to save that, but I also feel like we have a responsibility to know where we might want to put that if we saved it. It's you know, we're gonna have to store it and pay for storage, and we should have some kind of a plan. I think if we want to take really large things out of the house like that we don't really have any place to store, we'll be paying for the storage, and then we don't really know where we would use. So, Drew, I was going to ask earlier before Kate asked the question, the cost for these things, are we paying for that just out of the general fund, or where are we finding the money for that? Because I feel like this is a cost that we didn't really budget in when we did our original budgeting.
You're right. This was not a planned expense. We went into the year. We were tied up in litigation. But it would be a general fund expense, likely from the general fund dollars. Yep.
Okay.
Do we have more feedback on this subject?
I think what I would add is, since we've gotten ourselves into this situation, I think we owe it to the community to do what we can, find the money. Because I don't think that people, I agree with Joy, there are a lot of people, myself included, who are very sad about this house coming down, but people may not realize what's gone until it's gone and too late to save it. So there has to be some middle ground between saving everything, which we obviously can't do, and doing the least because it costs money. This has fallen on us to follow through with this part of this whole thing, whether we like it or not. I think we owe it to the community to save this, because I think if we all had our way, this would not be the outcome. So we just make sure we're doing it in a manner that's financially feasible. But let's do the most that we can afford to do, because we owe it to the community. Because once this is gone, then we'll hear people say, oh, why didn't you? There's no perfect outcome, but if we don't try to do the most we can, I think we'll regret it in the long run. We'll find homes for this. There are places we can feature these things.
So what I hear, Steve, go ahead.
Regis, let me chime in as well. I agree with everything that Kate and others have said. We owe it to the community. With this building's coming down, that was part of the agreement, was to save the artifacts. And if we have to basically loan money out of the general fund to a certain, I'd like to get to a dollar amount that we're willing, to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we ought to really, whether it's $50,000 or $60,000, time is of the essence here, because the clock is ticking. And Drew, I don't know, it's, I think 60 days from now, it's all got to be mined, right?
Yes.
So, we don't have a ton of time. We kind of have to say, okay, we're going to put $55,000, $60,000 up. We're going to mine the stuff that is, I would use 3 criteria. 1, what do we know is going to be used? What do we think is going to be used and or sold? And then what is the cost efficiency of doing that and kind of use that and take the stuff that's most in demand and the most, cost effective at getting out, and the stuff that doesn't make the cut, doesn't make the cut. And if we're able to sell this to Lake Forest or to residents, great. But because time is of the essence, I think we need to pick a number. We need to prioritize and move.
Thank you. So what I hear is, let me summarize for a second, that nobody is saying that we shouldn't do anything. Everybody is attached to saving some of the architectural artifacts in this house. What I hear, though, is we're not quite sure which one, and we probably have a budget in mind, but we need to set that budget to save these items. So what I also hear is a process is necessary, and I agree with that. And so what I would suggest is we put a budget to a process to list these items, to prioritize these items by relevance or by our choice, and we assign a budget for that whole adventure. That is, we know we will spend 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand, 50 grand, 60 grand, whatever the decision will be at this board. And let's say there's 20 items and the first 10 items are 50 grand, for example. Those are the 10 items. And we can argue on what those items are by a vote or by having all of us our lists, and we would be done. And that would be our process. And following the criteria from Steve, we basically would have our own criteria to see what the relevance is, but at the end of the day, we would end up with a consensus-based relevance for the items to be saved up to $1 amount. What do you guys think about that?
Can I just chime in for a moment? Because I think I'm hearing two different approaches. I think, yes, of course, a process is necessary and we have to be mindful of budget. But I really think what Kate said, it needs to be highlighted here, which is we have had many discussions about salvaging everything we possibly can, because that was the thing that the community wanted, was most heartbroken about. So I feel like as a group, we've already addressed that this might come at a cost. I recall us discussing storage options, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought we had some kind of efficient and financially, comfortable options that the village had maybe access to. But I guess I'm losing track here. Are we agreeing right now to salvage it all, or are we going to spend time right now rearranging the list?
Well, I think that there's a distinction to be made. So, Taryn, yes, we do have storage already available, so we're good with the storage. I think the point from Drew was some of these items might be very hard to achieve. So instead of spending a few $1,000s, it might be a lot more than that.
Right.
And so we might, let's say there are, I don't remember, 20 items in this list. We might be able to achieve the first 18 items for $50,000. And we might say, you know what, the next item number 19 and 20 might cost us another 30 grand. And do we want to do that? And so I think setting a process to know what items are in the list and what is the importance of these items, because we have an agreement, but setting a maximum budget that might not be limiting us for what we want, but limiting us for what we could want, but we cannot achieve. That is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Regis, what if we come up with a number and we've never talked about a hard number. The group has never had that conversation. And I think that that depends on what we have that's truly available to us. And then that's kind of narrow down what we can take, because that list, you can see like certain things are way, way more expensive in the thousands of dollars versus in the hundreds of dollars to salvage.
And can I ask?
It just seems like we need to start there with how much are we all comfortable with, and then we'll figure out what we can take once we figure out that number.
Thank you, Kate.
Can I ask?
Thank you. So what Kate is saying is let's agree on a number. Next would be, who raised their hand? That was Susan. Okay, Susan.
So my question before we get to the number is, have we had auction house come in and give us some kind of idea about the value of any of these, or what auction house I'm talking about even, but I have no sense of whether or not when you get the double pocket doors out and pay $17.50, you're going to get $17.50 back, or you're going to get 10,000 back. Do we have some reasonable expectation of getting dollars back for each of these items?
So
Go ahead.
I think when we met on site with the contractor and went through this list, there were a number of items. Frankly, if you're looking for the biggest return on your investment, just getting the brass hardware. That is, you know, those hinges, you know, are $50 a hinge, shockingly now. And you know, that's the general number. Item 10, $3,000. Going through the house and collecting the hardware would have a high return. But again, I think it was my understanding that the village, by identifying items originally in the settlement agreement, that there was an idea that at least those items were the high priority items, the windows, some of the fireplaces, some of the exterior elements like the deer heads and so forth. And then moving out beyond that, that these other items, it was not clear to me that the board's intentions were to be in the salvage business, right? To step in there and capture the goods and then turn them over to the private sector, to others. But if you want to do that, you can certainly do that. I guess I don't know, is there necessarily, to answer your question, Trustee Ryder, I don't know that there is a guarantee that you would get your money back or capture what you spent necessarily. But no, there was not an assessment made on that those French doors would yield a return. If we sold them on the market, you can get 5,000. I mean,
Yeah.
That was not done, no.
Because it's very hard to, I mean, it's very hard for me to come up with a number or cap without some sense of that. I mean, I guess I would say we want to spend what we think we could reasonably get back in the market, or the value we could bestow upon people who would appreciate them, if not, you know, the market, if you will. So while I understand a need for some kind of order of magnitude cap, it strikes me that unless we know something about where these will ultimately go, what the market for them is, or the demand in the community is, we don't know whether it's worth spending $1 on it.
I think that assumes that we we were going to sell things versus salvage them for their intrinsic value architecturally, not on the market. Like the second floor mantelpiece with the fruit basket. That's the only reason we want that is because it is unique to Shaw. So it's something that the History Museum wants for its historical value, not its monetary value. So maybe we were talking about, we have two categories of items, things that have market value like the brass hardware, and things that have maybe no market value except they have historic and architectural value. And maybe we need two categories then, because I agree, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and there are definitely some things that are worth salvaging, whether they're worth a penny or not. And I think we've identified some of those from the Lake Bluff Museum ones. But beyond that, I guess I was hoping for some kind of notion that what is useful, or what might be useful to salvage, as opposed to what will cost, how much, and how much it will cost to take it out. So you know, if it's $60,000 to get stuff that would bring 20,000, and plus a few items that we think have intrinsic value, that may be the right number. It's hard for me to know what we should spend on it without having some idea about where and what this stuff is worth ultimately.
So clearly to me, it seems to me that there is a leap of faith to be taken. I know two things in this story. There will be an order of salvaging items. Some are more valuable than other items, and the criteria might be different to actually judge what is more valuable than another thing. That's number one. So we need to create an order, and that order might actually be different person to person in this room. So we need to come to consensus for that. That's number one. Number two, the thing we have not discussed is budget. Okay? Are we going to spend $50,000? Are we going to spend $20,000? We need to come to up to a number. Okay? And given those two things, this is market pressure at this point. This is the list. This is what we would like to salvage, and this is what we can afford. And what I've seen in the last 25 minutes in the conversation is, well, we're not quite sure what is important, but I think we need to play consensus, and we need to play what is important to us as a community, and what is and including what is important to the History Museum. What do you guys think?
Well, one thing that I thought was that at this point in time, we would have had something that was like a summary, that wasn't just, well, these are some things that we could get, and this is the cost for some things, but something that did exactly what you're saying. So, you know, the clock we've lost that time. And so if we're going to decide it, it seems like we need general direction, but we also need a leader to say, I'm going to be the one that will shepherd this from collection to resolution. And instead we have a container and a bunch of stuff is going in there. It seems like we need somebody who is going to be over it. And how much do we want staff to be doing that? Because that influences how much we want to gather. And it sounds like the History Museum kind of did a global look, and what they distilled everything down to was, well, this is what we want. It didn't look at all the other things that we wanted. And I thought that's what we would have by now is, you know, these are of such and such a value. These are historical value. These are resale value. These are, you know, all of those things that we're asking for. So do we want to have staff doing that type of work? I kind of don't think so. So do we need to have somebody on the board to say, I will be the head of this? Or do we want to have a committee? No, that's.
I hear you.
I kind of echo.
John?
I kind of echo what Barbara's saying. Like, I think we do need to have someone spearhead this. I was never under the impression that we were going to go into the salvage business and try and sell things. I thought that for the most part, we were salvaging things for their historic significance. And I just sitting here listening, I'm just wondering if this is something that maybe the Historic Preservation Committee would like to oversee, since that is their area. And maybe we put a list together, a very general list that includes what we have here. And we give a dollar amount, and we ask them based on what the museum has asked for and the other items to rank things for us. I don't have the knowledge or the specialty to do something like that, and I would be surprised. Maybe Kate would, but I'm not sure that anyone else on this board does. But I agree, there needs to be someone sort of overseeing the process, and the clock is definitely ticking. I guess nobody wants to put a dollar amount on anything. I'm comfortable going up towards that higher end with this, so that we have the money if we do want to salvage it. And if we don't use all the money, fantastic, that's great. But I would like to have, I guess, the reserve there in case we do find something and we say, you know what, this would be great to salvage and use, you know, in the library or in Village Hall.
Thank you, Joy. So what I hear you saying is we need three things. We need a budget, we need a process to decide what items will be selected, and we need somebody to shepherd that process. And you're suggesting the HPC. What do you all think about that?
She suggested Kate, actually.
Or Kate.
Or Kate. So, sorry, I didn't
did.
hear that. I would agree with Kate.
Since I've been such a thanks, Steve. Since I've been such a passionate advocate about this building for so many years, I would be happy. I think Paul Bergman is probably the person who I would think of all the people on the HPC. I mean, they all have general knowledge, but Paul is an architectural historian. But I'm happy to work with him and them. I think that's a good idea, and I agree with Barbara. one thing I was going to say is I don't know how anyone could make decisions without better photographs. That was one thing I happen to have them because I did the tour, but the photographs we were provided do not help us at all. So I think what we'd probably need to do is set up a meeting. And I agree, Barbara, staff is busy, but they're going to have to be a party to this. But I'm happy to help. I'm happy to do that.
Would you be able to allocate a little bit of staff time to help, to assist?
Of course, yeah.
Kate? So let's say that Kate and HPC and with members to be decided would be spearheading this process. We need three things. We have Kate, volunteer, plus HPC. That's number one. Number two would be a process. So we need to have an objective process to judge what will be salvaged with an ordering system. This is our process. And number three is a budget. So I've heard that from Joy that we might want to go to a high number. What is the consensus on that?
I agree with Joy.
Can I just ask real quick, and Kate, you may be the right one to answer this. We have something that currently costs about $50,000. Is there a sense that there are other items in there in addition to those that may be of value that may end up ultimately on the list that you work on with the historic preservation?
Yes, I sent photographs to Drew this morning of items that were not on that list. Now we'll have to talk to Jim Leduc and probably Paul, but the HPC members about the ability to salvage some of those. But there are some things that were not on there. So I would say, if you say 50, we have to have a cushion. But Joy's right. If we don't use it, then that's fine. But if we don't have it and we miss out on one gem, boy, we're just going to kick ourselves. This is it. Like Barbara said, the clock's ticking. We've got 60 days. So I think being penny wise and pound foolish here is not the way to go.
So I'll throw a number out, Regis, because you need that to get started. I mean, the way I look at this is we had a lawsuit. We tried to save the building. We couldn't save the building. It is our responsibilities as trustees to our community to save what's in the building. This is part of the cost. We were spending legal fees. This is part of the cost. And we'll take that leap of faith that we're going to make some money back in some way, shape, or form. But we don't have an exact science to that. So I would like to make a motion to have Kate, along with the Historic Preservation Committee, lead the salvaging and the list, and that we assign a budget of $75,000.
And I just, on the specific, when you say the Historic Preservation Committee, are you talking about all 7 members as a body? Because then you've got some procedural issues about how they're going to make their decisions, and it may.
Could it be more casual, Kate, and the chair of that committee, or?
That's fine. I mean, that gets rid of the Open Meetings Act issue.
Yeah, and just for clarity's sake, my understanding is the History Museum individuals that looked over this included the chair of the HPC, who's also, so Steve Krause has already reviewed this list.
And by this list, what do you mean?
Thank you. I'm referring to the list of the Jim Leduc provided the proposal.
Okay, but nobody has looked at it other than Jim. Like, we don't have a longer list of
This, so when we went through the house with the contractor, we being building code supervisor Mike Croak, who's an architect, myself, and Glenn Cole, we went through the building. Glenn was taking photos. We were all talking with the contractor who had his mason sub and his carpentry sub. And we were going through and looking at items. For example, one of the items that Kate showed in a photo earlier was painting on stucco that is above a doorway coming out of the main room going out to the north. But it's painting on stucco, and it's very difficult. And the contractor was like, if I tried to get that off, I would likely destroy it. I don't want to give you a number for that because it's on plaster, and he felt it was too brittle and would fall apart. So there was other examples of items in there that he didn't give us prices for those reasons. And he tried to give us prices for things he felt like they could capture at a reasonable price. But we didn't say, to your earlier question, Susan, you know, did we felt like these were something you can turn a profit on? Not necessarily, right? You know, I think it's going to be difficult to determine that. And I don't know if that's, you know, there could be, one of the criteria could be, do we think there's an aftermarket for it? Maybe, but I think it's subjective and hard to know for how long and et cetera, what that universe of buyer would be. But that was kind of the general process. We went through this. Some of the items in there that may seem bizarre to you, for example, there's a large beam that they looked at, that oak beam in the billiards room. Well, that's one. It was extremely easy to pull out. That $1,500, it's not a lot. It's not a beam that is structural in nature, but it's enormous, and that they felt like there would be an aftermarket for that particular item for that price. So some of those
Well,
items.
that's exactly what I'm getting at,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I know I don't want to sound like a profit maker here. That's not the point. But
Yeah.
whenever you sell a house that's going to be torn down, and you go through it and you look at what it's going to cost to take a door off the hinges and take it with you,
Yeah.
as opposed to, have the bulldozer take it down. And that's the kind of evaluation that I had thought we had some reseller, some restoration reseller in mind to go through and tell us what it had
Yeah.
any value. But I may have been mistaken about that. I thought that there was some third party we could rely upon to tell us this is what's worth salvaging, putting aside for a minute, which I appreciate and is really the most important thing, the valuable items that have some historical value as well. But I'm on the high end. I'm on the high end of these numbers because I think that there's lots that should be salvaged. I'm not on the high end of the numbers because I think we ought to be donating $75,000 to the cause. So I'm not entirely sure what we're voting on, but if we think we can go in and salvage, and either through historical value or monetary value get the some amount back, then I'd be for doing that.
So to answer your question, I keep hearing that we're under the clock to get this achieved. I'm a little bit afraid that, to your request, Suzanne, that getting an estimate by an auction house, for example, would actually take a little bit more time than necessary in this process.
Right.
And I think we're under the gun to get this done.
Sure.
And so there is a motion on the table by Steve that is, well, we will proceed with as a leap of faith. We put on the table $75,000 with a process that will be spearheaded by Kate, and the motion was, and the HPC. And to Peter's point, we might not want to do that. It might be a couple individuals as opposed to Kate and HPC. So if you guys are okay with that, I would like to ask Steve to revise his motion to change it to not include HPC, for example. But to your point, Suzanne, I don't know how we're going to achieve knowing how much we spend and how much we would get at the end by an auction house.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, I
as-
understand. At this juncture, that's not possible. I don't know where I came up with a notion that was what was happening.
My
Because-
recollection of the original direction was, there's certain things we know we want. The stained glass windows, those items like that are on the short list. And the direction was, get a price to go get them, store them, and then we'll just, dispose of them later. And that's what this direction was, and that's why it looks like this. And I think there's some, I guess, lack of comfort with moving ahead in this manner at this point. But we are under a time crunch.
Sure. So I don't want to leave that door that we should have salvaged. Leave it to the bulldozers.
Yeah, but can I give
because
you one
we
more?
didn't put enough money
I'm
into it. So go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just as another example, item 7, that dark granite surround and that large entry door. That's probably one of the few good photos here. But the picture of Jim LeDuc standing in the doorway at the, that item, That door is enormous, but it's also the entry side from the exterior. The exterior side of that door is in good condition. The interior side is not. It's warped, but this is an item that it's massive, and it has, I think, the value, historical, intrinsic value, not necessarily market value. But that's one of the items that the History Museum wants. But like the carpenter looked at it and said, oh, look at the back side of it, it's all warped. You know, that's like something that he couldn't use because once, that goes, it's gone. So, but, the granite is beautiful. But anyway, that's another example versus like, again, the hinges, which is, easy money. Take a, battery-powered screwdriver, pull as many off as you can, and you can get your money's worth easily out of that work. So,
Susan, your memory's not wrong. It was architectural artifacts was brought up one time. And that would be the salvage. I mean, now they are more of an event space, really, but that's and there's another place called Salvage One. And both of them have gone in pre-demo and done salvage work in huge buildings in the city. And then they turn around and sell the product. So there are, and for like the door, for example, Drew's describing some door that none of us could use, but might be. So just to throw that out there.
So I need to proceed with this part of the meeting. We have another half of this meeting in front of us. So we still have a motion on the table by Steve with Kate and members of HPC, I believe, at this point for a total price of a budget of $75,000.
Do we avoid problems of the Open Meetings Act if we say in the motion that Steve or somebody else might give that it's Kate plus one member from the HPC plus another member from, some other place?
From the museum, maybe?
Yeah, and just create representation and be able to move forward. And then from us, I think I haven't put out a number, but 75 seems to take the initial list and allow for a little bit of wiggle. I feel comfortable, at least that is a good starting point. And then certainly when Kate and the team do what they do and they come back with a list that's 150, we might just say, no, it's nice to have, but we're not going to do that. We'll do our bit and then move on. We don't know, but I feel like we've got a great starting point. And Peter, if you want to give guidance as far as who we can say would be on the committee with Kate, one person from the HPC and one person from the museum, hopefully, would that work?
Yeah,
Peter,
that's not a problem.
Can
That's
I just wanted to ask you, Peter, can I just have one person from the HPC or so two would constitute
okay.
an open if there
two's okay.
Two is fine.
two? Okay.
If you had Steve Kraus, he could he could meet with you on the museum stand front, but he also sits on the HPC. I mean,
Yeah.
he does both. So I don't know if that matters.
Two birds
depending
in
on
one
which
stone.
hat he has on. Yeah.
That's true. He could put that hat on. I was just thinking of Paul, just because he has such a remarkable depth of knowledge about this particular subject.
Well, you could do both. You could do both of them.
So
Yeah, right. That's
what we're saying is Kate and two members of HPC. That's where we are right now. And the motion was also indicating a figure of $75,000. I heard agreement from Barb, I heard Joy, I heard Susan, I heard Steve, Taryn
Darren?
and Kate. What is your advice?
I'm
75?
not gonna spend time weighing in because I agree. I think it's a good thing. So
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
So
That's fine.
Thank you. So we are good for the budget of 75. Can we please have, Steve, can you please revise your motion to indicate these elements?
You're muted, Steve.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a motion to ask trustee Brianne to lead a group, including at least or two people from the HBC and possibly somebody from the History Museum and other people she deems necessary to prioritize a list of artifacts to be taken from Stonebridge with a budget price of $75,000.
I second.
Thank you. Is this a roll call or a vote?
That's direction. Yeah, but before we do that, just to be clear, Peter Friedman, to talk about a little bit, there's the legal elements with the agreement in terms of notice and working with the Roanoke Group on, we need to get more time from them. We're gonna have to ask for time to make sure we can do all this, so we'll try to work through that. And just for clarity's sake, is it everyone's understanding that with this budget and these individuals, that they're gonna be able to work within those parameters and then bring back an after-the-fact agreement perhaps with the contractor to be approved by this body
I think this is necessary, yes.
for timing's sake? Just want to clarify that?
That's my understanding.
Okay,
Me
just
too.
want to clarify. Great.
Thank you. So we have a direction. Thank you so much for this discussion.
You need
Roll
a,
call.
yeah.
So moving on,
No, you mean call.
Need roll
Roll call.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you please call, clerk, please call the roll?
Trustee Ingemann,
Aye.
Trustee Markey,
Aye.
Trustee Brian,
Aye.
Trustee Fisher,
Aye.
Trustee Ryder,
Aye.
Trustee Rappin.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the second item for this meeting, the discussion regarding the replacement of lead service lines. During the 2021 legislative session, the General Assembly passed the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act. The act, which is more fully described in the attached IML fact sheet, imposes numerous mandates on municipalities intended to eliminate all lead service lines in Illinois, as well as certain galvanized steel service lines contaminated by their connection to lead fittings. The most important mandates for village operations include the village must identify affected service lines by 2024 and submit a plan to the EPA. The village must replace all affected service lines by 2042 at a steady annual rate after 2027, for 15 years. And number three, effective January 1st, 2022, the village must completely replace the affected service lines when repairing the lines or replacing the water mains they are connected to, regardless of who would be financially responsible for maintenance of a line. And that gives a good summary to start with. Would you mind?
Well, there's not a lot of time to discuss the meat of this, but on tonight's agenda, on the regular village board meeting, there's a contract with Boulder Construction for water main replacement that's going to involve, we're going to run into a couple of lead services that we're going to have to deal with, and the village is, I think, early in the conversation, very early, and not unlike everybody else in the state, of working through this new requirement. And we were looking for some general direction, knowing that we're going to be coming back to you all multiple times likely as we build a plan and program around this to address the variety of situations that people are in, knowing that, you know, we're going to be continuing to place water mains throughout town, that there are some water mains that have already been replaced, and potentially that copper has already been placed up to a B box already in certain areas, and then other areas are completely untouched. And so there'll be a variety of buckets of potential homeowners that we'll be dealing with, but also dealing with, you know, affordability and equity. So I don't know how much further we can get tonight on this item. We can just punt it, probably.
We have 7 minutes in front of us. It is not enough for
No.
a very meaningful conversation, probably costing about $1 million.
Yeah.
And so I think we should table the discussion to our next
Yeah.
committee of the whole.
I think maybe the only thing to cover is, one of the main takeaways from this is, in the near term, what we wanted to do was maybe memorialize the practice that what the village has done, certainly since Jeff Hansen has been the village engineer, and George Russell did a lot of this as well, is that when we're out replacing water mains and we come across galvanized or lead services, we will replace them up into the property line, more or less, where the connection is at the B box. And then we've let whatever's theirs remain. And sometimes some homeowners have gone ahead and, you know, replaced the balance of it, because there's never a cheaper opportunity to do so, but sometimes they haven't. So that's what we're looking to do, certainly for these others moving forward. We can try to work with them, and as we go through this process, maybe bring back some other information from those particular homeowners to help shape this policy, kind of be a pilot program, if you will. So
I think for the time being, it would be a good continuation of current practices, but I believe that we need to have a good conversation about that.
Sure.
I think it will affect us. We have an obligation by the state to replace these lines. It affects the wellness of our community, especially for the parents of children in this community. And I think we need to have a good policy to actually effectively replace that from feeding water to residents.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Can I please have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
So we stay on the same line. Yeah, just stay on the same Zoom. Take 5.
We're back at 7 p.m.